We'll compare how LangChain agents differ from Deep Agent Framework. Deep Agent Framework is something that got released quite a few months back, and the main difference is that it has inbuilt a lot of tools and middleware within it that it can be utilized in complex agentic workflows. So it has capacity to take in sub agents, which we'll demonstrate in this particular video. So we'll first build a LangChain simplistic agentic pipeline, and then we'll build a deep agent framework and compare the two results. So firstly, we'll install the packages. So we'll install the LangChain requirement, and then we'll define our API keys. So I already have the environment variable with the OpenAI API key and the Tavily API key. Tavily API key is nothing but um, a, API key which gives us access to web search. So we'll define a web search tool shortly. Okay, now this is the web search tool, and then we have also defined a calculate risk score. The objective is to identify if there are any qualitative risks to any offering vendor that we'll ask a question on. So this particular calculate risk score tool calculates a score based upon three inputs: the financial risk, operational risk, and the regulatory risks. It just takes an average across the three and then categorizes the risk into a high, medium, or a low bucket. And then we are basically saving the output of the agent in a markdown format. So we'll define these tools, and then we'll test the web search tool directly. So if I search something like Microsoft Quality News, we'll be able to get the links corresponding to Microsoft Quality. Now we can test out the calculated risk score tool as well, where if we give these three, we'll get the average rating corresponding to the risk. So in part A, we'll calculate the risk corresponding to the output from the LangChain agent, a simplistic agentic pipeline. So we'll define a LangChain agent using the OpenAI API, and it's given a system prompt that it's a procurement risk analyst, and we'll give a normal query to analyze suppliers such as Microsoft for any service. So when we give that particular query, it's doing the web search using the Tavily API, getting the results, and assessing the risk generated from that, and then getting the category up for the risk as well. So this is a summary of the risk assessed for Microsoft: financial risk, operational risk, etc., and the risk score and the overall risk score as well. Now this is a simplistic agentic architecture where the user request is going to a single agent and ultimately going into tool calls, and then the final answer is drafted. However, if we want a detailed research for this particular user request, right, we can utilize deep agents framework, which has inbuilt a lot of sub agents within it. So we can define sub agents within a deep agent framework, and you can see that the answer would be much more richer. So going into the deep agent, we'll firstly define the sub agents. Sub agents we can think of as an analogy to tools corresponding to an agent. So if we define the sub agent something like a research agent, which can research upon the suppliers such as Microsoft in this example, and then a risk scoring sub agent to calculate the risk, and then finally we'll have the final brief writing agent which will ultimately write the brief. So we'll define these subagents and then integrate them into the deep agent and add the same prompt that we passed to the first LangChain simplistic agent. Now, when we're doing this, it's basically fetching the records from the web search and then assessing the risk corresponding to Microsoft as a supplier, and then providing a response. So we should get a much richer response than the response that we just saw, because the deep agent framework has the components of sub agents which do a lot of in-depth task analysis within it. And we are also saving the report into a markdown format. So I'll execute this cell as well. Okay. Yeah, it is still executing at the moment, taking over a minute. Yeah, but it gave the output here. We'll just see the output in Markdown. So if I open this, we can see that the supplier risk briefing for Microsoft includes an executed summary, the key risks from operational cybersecurity and other perspectives, and the risk score and the rationale for the risk score as well, and the recommendation and the other details. So it's a much richer response that we got from the deep agent framework compared to the simple agent that we used in LangChain. So essentially comparing the two approaches, both approaches are very similar. Just that in the first approach, the single agent calls the tool, the web search and the calculate risk, whereas the deep agent calls the research subagent, the risk scoring subagent, and the brief writing subagent, and ultimately provides the response. And this deep agentic framework is much more useful in complex agentic workflows where there are multiple steps. And this is actually how we'll utilize in much more complex agentic workflows downstream in additional videos. And there are a few use cases when we should use one over the other. I'll link this particular notebook in the GitHub repo down below. So feel free to have a look and then experiment yourself on how to utilize deep agents.